The stars were quiet tonight. Admiral Havik looked out from his command ship at the endless space around him. 200 years had passed since humans disappeared from the galaxy. Nobody knew where they went or why they left. Some said they died out. Others believed they found a new home far away. Havik did not care much about old stories. He had work to do. The Galactic Council ruled the galaxy now. 3 great races worked together to keep peace. The Vreks were like giant insects with hard shells and many arms. They were good at building things and making plans. The Nephilim lived in water and had smooth blue skin. They were smart and could solve hard problems. The Takari looked like walking crystals that glowed with soft light. They knew much about science and energy. For 200 years, these 3 races had lived in peace. They built trade routes between star systems. They shared technology and knowledge. Wars were rare and small. Most beings in the galaxy were happy with their lives. Food was plenty, and medicine could cure most sickness. Space travel was safe and easy, but that was before the darkness came. The first sign of trouble came from the edge of the galaxy. A mining colony called Red Rock Station stopped sending messages. The council sent a small ship to check what happened. When the ship arrived, they found nothing. The station was still there, but it was cold and dark. All the lights were off. All the machines had stopped working. The rescue team put on their spacesuits and went inside. They walked through empty halls with their lights shining ahead of them. Everything looked normal, but something felt wrong. The air was too cold. The metal walls felt strange to touch. When they found the people who worked at the station, they were all dead. But they had not been hurt or shot. They just looked like they had fallen asleep and never woke up. The ship's doctor checked the bodies. She could not find what killed them. Their hearts had stopped, but there was no poison in their blood. No disease in their bodies. No wounds or broken bones. It was like something had just turned them off, the way you might turn off a light. More reports came in over the next few days. 3 more colonies had gone silent. Then a trading ship stopped sending messages. Then another mining station. All of them were found the same way. Dark, cold, and full of dead people who looked like they had just gone to sleep. The council called an emergency meeting. Representatives from all 3 races gathered on the capital world of Nexus Prime. They sat in a great circle and talked about what was happening. Some thought it was a new disease. Others believed it was some kind of weapon. A few suggested that the colonies were being attacked by raiders who left no survivors. Admiral Javik stood up to speak. He was old for a Vrex, and his shell had many scars from smaller wars in the past. His voice was deep and rough when he talked. "We need to send a real fleet to investigate," he said. "Small ships cannot handle whatever is out there. I will take 300 ships to the border and find out what is killing our people." The council agreed. They were scared, but they trusted Havik. He had fought in many battles and never lost. His fleet was strong and his crews were well trained. If anyone could solve this problem, it would be him. Javik prepared his ships quickly. He took his best captains and his strongest weapons. The fleet included battleships with thick armor and powerful guns, fast cruisers that could move quickly through space, support ships full of supplies and repair equipment. It was enough firepower to destroy a small planet. The fleet traveled to the edge of the galaxy where the colonies had died. They moved slowly and carefully, watching their instruments for any sign of danger. Their sensors reached out into space looking for enemy ships or strange energy readings, but space seemed normal and empty. Then they reached Kepler Station. Kepler Station was one of the largest outposts on the border. It had been home to 50,000 people. Workers, traders, families with children. It should have been busy with ships coming and going. But when Javik's fleet arrived, they found only silence. The station hung in space like a giant metal city. But no lights were on. No ships moved around it. No radio signals came from inside. It looked like a dead thing floating in the darkness. Javik ordered his ships to surround the station. His best scouts put on special suits and went inside to look around. They carried powerful lights and weapons, but they found no enemies. Only empty halls and dead people. Thousands and thousands of them, all looking like they had simply stopped living. That was when the real enemy appeared. At first, it looked like a shadow moving between the stars, something darker than the space around it. Havik's sensors could barely detect it. When they tried to get a clear picture, the readings made no sense. The thing seemed to be there and not there at the same time. Then more shadows appeared, dozens of them, moving toward the fleet like hunting animals. They had no clear shape, just darkness that flowed and changed. As they got closer, strange things began to happen to Havik's ships. The lights started to dim. Computers began to shut down. The engines that powered the great warships grew weaker and weaker. Some ships lost all power and began to drift helplessly through space. Others managed to keep some systems working, but their weapons would not fire. Javik tried to contact his other ships, but the radio was full of static. He could hear his captains shouting for help, but their voices were getting fainter. One by one, the ships in his fleet went dark and quiet. The shadows moved closer. Now Havik could see them better, and he wished he could not. They were not solid like normal ships. They seemed to be made of pure darkness with no clear edges or surfaces. Inside each shadow, he could see tiny lights moving around. Maybe the energy they had stolen from his ships and crews. His own ship was losing power too. The bridge grew cold and dark. His officers tried to restart the engines, but nothing worked. The shadows were feeding on their energy like hungry animals. They were drinking the light and warmth and life from everything they touched. Javik knew he was going to die. But he was a warrior, and he would not die quietly. He grabbed the emergency radio and sent one last message to the council. His voice was weak because the shadows were draining his life too. But he spoke clearly. "This is Admiral Javik to Galactic Command. We have found the enemy. They are not ships or machines. They are something else. Something that feeds on energy and life itself. Our weapons cannot hurt them. Our shields cannot stop them. They are coming for all of us. Prepare the council worlds. Find a way to fight them. Find a way to—" The radio went dead. The last lights on his ship flickered and went out. In the darkness, Havik felt his strength leaving him. The shadows had won. News of the fleet's destruction reached the council within hours. 300 of their best ships lost without firing a single shot. 50,000 crew members dead or missing. Admiral Havik, their greatest military leader, was gone. Panic spread across the galaxy like wildfire. If Javik's mighty fleet could not stop these shadow creatures, what hope did anyone else have? The council called emergency sessions. Military leaders made desperate plans. Scientists worked day and night to understand the enemy. But deep in their hearts, many beings began to fear that their time of peace was over. Something terrible had come to their galaxy, something that wanted to devour all the light and life they had built together. And they had no idea how to fight it. 3 months had passed since Admiral Javik's fleet disappeared into the darkness. The shadow creatures, which the council now called void hunters, had not stopped their terrible work. They moved from system to system like a plague, leaving death behind them wherever they went. 12 star systems were now empty and cold. Billions of people had died. Entire worlds that once glowed with city lights now floated in space like dark stones. The void hunters seemed to grow stronger with each attack. Their dark fleet was getting bigger, as if they could turn the energy they stole into more of their own kind. The remaining fleets of the council tried many times to fight back. They used every weapon they had. Plasma cannons, missile storms, energy beams that could melt metal. Nothing worked. The void hunters simply absorbed the energy from the weapons and grew stronger. Ships that got too close lost all power and drifted away as tombs for their crews. On the capital world of Nexus Prime, the council met every day in emergency session. The great chamber where they usually talked about trade agreements and peaceful settlements now echoed with arguments and desperate plans. Representative Korvac of the Vrex slammed his clawed hand on the table. "We must evacuate the border worlds," he said. "Pull everyone back to the core systems and make a stand there." "And give up half the galaxy?" replied Counselor Ithara of the Nephilim. Her blue skin was pale with worry. "Those are our homes, our colonies. Billions of people live there. Better to save some than lose everyone," Korvac shot back. "These creatures cannot be fought with normal weapons. We need time to find another way." In the corner of the chamber, scientist Zalara worked quietly at her crystal console. She was one of the Takari, and her body glowed with a soft white light when she was thinking hard. For days, she had been searching through old records and forgotten databases, looking for anything that might help them understand their enemy. Most of the other council members had given up hope of finding useful information. The galaxy's history went back thousands of years, but nothing like the Void Hunters had ever appeared before. At least that was what everyone believed. But Zalara was more careful than the others. She looked deeper into the records, back to the very oldest files that most people ignored. Ancient star charts from the early days of space travel. Stories and legends that most scientists considered worthless. archaeological reports from dead worlds that had been empty for so long that no one remembered who had lived there. That was where she found the first clue. It was buried in a report about the ruins on a planet called Sirian 4. The archaeologists who wrote the report had found strange symbols carved into black stone. Most of the symbols were too damaged to read, but a few words could still be made out. Words like shadow and hunger and the great darkness. The archaeologists had thought it was just an old story about mythical monsters, but one phrase made Zalara's heart beat faster. Warrior species from distant stars. She searched for more references to these warriors. It took her 2 days of careful work, but slowly she began to put together pieces of a very old puzzle. The symbols on Sirian 4 were not the only ones. Similar carvings had been found on dozens of dead worlds, all along the outer edge of the galaxy. The story they told was always the same. A great darkness had come from the void between stars. It had consumed entire civilizations, drinking their energy and leaving nothing behind. But then warriors had arrived from far away. They had fought the darkness with weapons of light and fire. In the end, they had driven it back into the cold spaces between galaxies, but the cost had been terrible. The warrior species had lost many of their own people in the fighting. The ancient records spoke of a final gambit and a long sleep that would last until the darkness returned. Zalara found one more piece of information that made her hands shake with excitement. Coordinates, a location in space where the warriors had made their last stand. The records called it the place of waiting and the chamber of dreams. She brought her discoveries to the council immediately. The chamber fell silent as she shared what she had learned. When she finished speaking, Counselor Ithara was the first to respond. "You think these ancient warriors were humans?" she said. It was not a question. "The timing fits," Zalara replied. "The records speak of events that happened roughly 200 years ago. That is exactly when humans disappeared from our space." "But why would they leave us?" asked Representative Korvac. "If they knew this darkness would return, why did they not warn us?" "Maybe they tried," said Zalara. "Or maybe they knew we would not believe them. How many of us would have listened to warnings about shadow monsters from the void?" Commander Thex of the Nephilim stepped forward. He was a military officer with scars from smaller battles, but his eyes were clear and brave. "Where are these coordinates?" he asked. "If there is even a small chance that sleeping humans can help us, we must investigate." Zalara showed him the location on a star chart. It was far from the main trade routes in a region of space that most ships avoided. Asteroid fields made travel dangerous, and there were no valuable planets or resources there. If someone wanted to hide something, it would be a perfect place. "I will take a small fleet," Thex said. "Fast ships that can avoid the void hunters and reach these coordinates quickly." The council argued about the plan for hours. Some members thought it was a waste of time and resources. They said the ancient records were just old stories, not real history. Others worried that splitting their forces would make them weaker when the void hunters attacked the core worlds. But as the debate continued, more reports arrived from the border systems. The void hunters were moving faster now, consuming 3 or 4 colonies each day. At this rate, they would reach the inner worlds within a month. The council was running out of time and options. Finally, they voted to approve Thex's mission. He would take 12 fast ships and investigate the coordinates. If he found nothing, he would return quickly. If he found something useful, he would send word immediately. Thex chose his best crews and prepared for the journey. They loaded their ships with extra fuel and supplies, knowing they might be gone for weeks. As they prepared to leave, many of their friends and families came to say goodbye. Everyone knew this might be their last hope. The small fleet jumped into hyperspace and disappeared among the stars. For 3 days, they traveled through the empty regions at the edge of the galaxy. They passed dead systems with no planets, fields of cosmic dust where stars had died long ago, and vast stretches of space where nothing lived or moved. On the 4th day, they reached the coordinates Zalara had found. At first, they saw nothing but asteroids and cosmic debris. Commander Thex was beginning to think the mission had been a failure, but then his sensor officer called out in excitement, "Commander, I am detecting artificial structures hidden in the asteroid field. Something big." Thex ordered his ships to move closer carefully. As they approached, their sensors began to pick up more details. What they found made them all stare in wonder and fear. Hidden among the asteroids was a massive space station unlike anything they had ever seen. It was clearly built by humans, but the technology was far beyond anything the Council races possessed. The station was kilometers long and wide, with sections that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. Most of the station was dark and quiet, but some sections still showed signs of power. Energy readings indicated that something inside was still active after 200 years of waiting. Thex sent scout teams to board the station. They found airlocks that still worked and corridors that were still pressurized. Emergency lighting guided them deeper into the structure. Everything was clean and well-maintained, as if the station's inhabitants had just stepped out for a moment. Then they found the first chamber. It was enormous, filled with thousands of cylindrical pods arranged in perfect rows. Each pod was made of a clear material that let them see inside. Most of the pods were empty, but several hundred still contained sleeping figures, humans. They floated in a blue liquid, connected to machines that monitored their vital signs. They looked peaceful, as if they were having pleasant dreams. But instruments showed that they were not just sleeping, they were in deep cryogenic suspension. Their bodies kept at the edge of death to preserve them across the centuries. Thex and his team found computer terminals near the chambers. The screens were written in human languages, but their translation software could read most of it. The files spoke of Project Deep Sleep and the Final Watch. They mentioned warriors who had volunteered to sleep until they were needed again. One file made Thex's blood run cold. It was a recording made by a human general just before the station went into hibernation mode. The general spoke in a tired voice about fighting the hunger, creatures of living darkness that fed on energy and life. He described weapons and tactics that could hurt such entities, knowledge that had cost humanity dearly to acquire. "We have driven them back," the general said in the recording, "but they will return someday when new generations have forgotten the danger. When that time comes, our descendants will need warriors who remember how to fight the darkness. We go to sleep now, trusting that others will wake us when the galaxy needs us again." Commander Thex realized that the sleeping humans were not refugees or survivors. They were soldiers. Veterans of the message from Commander Thex reached the council chambers just as another report arrived about the Void Hunters. They had consumed the Tau Ceti system overnight, killing 3 billion people. The Dark Fleet was now only 2 jumps away from the core worlds. Panic filled the great chamber as representatives shouted over each other, "We cannot trust these sleeping humans." Representative Korvac slammed his clawed fist on the table. "We know nothing about them. What if they are hostile? What if they decide we are their enemies too?" Counselor Ithara's blue skin was pale with fear, but her voice stayed calm. "What choice do we have? Our fleets cannot stop the Void Hunters. These humans fought them before and won. 200 years ago," Korvac shot back. "Who knows what they were like then? Humans were always dangerous. They fought wars over small things. They never trusted anyone." Scientist Zalara stood up from her crystal console. Her body glowed brighter than usual as she spoke. "The ancient records show that humans saved many worlds from the darkness. They sacrificed themselves to protect others. If they were truly evil, why would they do that?" The debate went on for precious hours while the Void Hunters moved closer to populated systems. Finally, Supreme Chancellor Vex called for a vote. The decision was close, but the majority agreed. They would wake the sleeping humans. Commander Thex received the order while his teams were still exploring the vast station. They had found more chambers filled with sleeping warriors, weapons that seemed to bend light itself, and computers containing battle strategies against energy-based enemies. Everything suggested that these humans really had fought the Void Hunters before. The awakening process was complex. The station's computers required multiple authorization codes, biometric scans, and safety protocols. It was clear that the humans had not wanted anyone to wake them up by accident. Thex's engineers worked carefully to follow the proper procedures. "The process will take 72 hours, reported Chief Engineer Nala. "The humans' bodies need time to adjust slowly from deep freeze to normal temperature. If we rush it, we could kill them. 72 hours. Thex looked at the tactical displays showing Void Hunter movements. They might not have that much time, but there was no choice. They had to do this right. The awakening began with the first chamber. Machines hummed to life as they slowly warmed the cryogenic pods. The blue liquid inside began to drain away, replaced by breathable atmosphere. Monitors showed heart rates gradually increasing from almost nothing to normal human levels. On the first day, The sleepers began to show signs of brain activity. Their closed eyes moved beneath their eyelids as if they were dreaming. Some of them twitched or made small sounds. The station's medical systems reported that their bodies were responding well to the revival process. On the second day, more complex life signs appeared. The sleepers began to breathe on their own instead of relying on machines. Their skin color improved from the pale blue of near-death to healthier pink tones. A few of them seemed to be struggling to wake up, making restless movements in their pods. Thex received constant updates from the front lines. The Void Hunters had reached the Rigel system and were consuming the outer colonies there. Evacuation ships fled toward the core worlds carrying millions of refugees. The creatures were moving faster now, as if they could sense that their prey was gathering in one place. On the morning of the third day, the first pod opened. Steam hissed out as the transparent cover slid back. Inside, a human male slowly opened his eyes. He was tall and muscular with scars on his arms and chest that spoke of many battles. His black hair was cut short in a military style. As he sat up in the pod, his dark eyes immediately focused on the alien faces around him. Commander Thex stepped forward carefully. He had studied human body language and knew that sudden movements might seem threatening. "I am Commander Thex of the Galactic Council Navy," he said in slow, clear words. "You have been asleep for 200 years. We need your help." The human's eyes sharpened with alertness. When he spoke, his voice was rough from the long sleep but strong. "I am Commander Taemin of the Human Defense Force. What is the status of the Shadow War?" Thex felt a chill run down his spine. This human had been asleep for 2 centuries, but his first thoughts were about the war against the darkness. "The creatures you call shadows have returned. We call them Void Hunters now. They have destroyed 12 of our star systems." Taemin's expression grew hard and grim. He looked like a man who had seen terrible things and was not surprised to hear that more terrible things were happening. "How long ago did they return?" 3 months, Thex replied. "Our weapons cannot hurt them. They drain energy from our ships and leave our people dead." 3 months. Taemin nodded slowly. "Then we are not too late. Where are my people?" Other pods were opening now. More humans emerged from their long sleep, coughing and shaking as their bodies remembered how to move. Thex watched them with fascination and growing hope. These were not ordinary people. They moved like soldiers even while still weak from hibernation. Their eyes were alert and focused. When they saw each other, they nodded with the easy recognition of old comrades. A woman with short brown hair climbed out of her pod with quick, efficient movements. Despite having just awakened from 2 centuries of sleep, she immediately began checking on the other sleepers. "Captain Sora, reporting for duty," she said to Taemin. "Status report?" "The hunger has returned," Taemin replied. "The local species cannot fight them. We are needed again." Another human joined them, a young man with careful eyes who studied the alien technology around him with professional interest. "Lieutenant Wu Jin, ready for orders." "Are we on the Haven 7 station?" "Yes," said Taemin. "And we have visitors." He gestured toward Commander Thex and his team. More humans were awakening now. They helped each other out of the pods and quickly formed into military units. Thex was amazed at how organized they were, despite having just awakened from the longest sleep in history. They acted like a well-trained army that had simply been on a short break. A woman with bright, intelligent eyes approached the group. She had been examining the readouts from the station's sensors while the others talked. "Engineer Hana reporting." "Commander, I have bad news. The hunger entities are much stronger than they were before. They have consumed more energy and grown larger." Taemin frowned. "Show me." Hana led them to a control room where holographic displays showed the current state of the galaxy. Red markers indicated systems that had been consumed by the Void Hunters. The pattern of their advance was clear and purposeful. "They are following the old feeding routes," Captain Sora observed. "Just like before. But they have learned to move faster." "How many of our people awakened?" Taemin asked. 437, reported Lieutenant Wu Jin after checking the pod status displays. "We lost 63 to hibernation failure over the centuries. The others are still in deep sleep in the other facilities." Thex stepped forward. "Other facilities? There are more humans sleeping?" "Thousands," Taemin replied. "Hidden throughout the galaxy in case this day came. But it will take time to wake them all. And time is something we do not have." He studied the tactical display showing Void Hunter movements. "How long until they reach your core worlds?" Perhaps days, Thex admitted. Our evacuation fleets are falling back as fast as they can, but the creatures are faster. Taman nodded grimly. Then we fight with what we have. 400 soldiers against an army of darkness. We have faced worse odds before. Engineer Hana was working at one of the station's computers. Her fingers moved quickly over controls that seemed familiar to her despite the long sleep. Commander, our weapons are still in storage. The AI systems have been maintaining and upgrading them according to our pre-sleep programming. We have new designs based on 200 years of analysis. What kind of weapons? Asked Captain Sora. Phase disruptors that can target entities existing between dimensions. Light spears that channel pure solar energy. Void anchors that force incorporeal beings into physical space where they can be destroyed. Commander Thex felt hope rising in his chest for the first time in months. You really know how to fight these creatures? Taman looked at him with eyes that held memories of terrible battles. We did not choose to sleep for 200 years because we were tired. We chose it because we knew this day would come. The hunger always returns. It feeds on galaxies and then moves on to find new prey, but it leaves scouts behind to call it back when the galaxy has recovered enough to be worth consuming again. The Void Hunters are scouts? Thex felt sick. The first wave, confirmed Captain Sora. The real hunger is still out there in dark space. If we do not stop these scouts, they will signal for their master to return. Then billions will die instead of millions. Lieutenant Wu Jin was checking weapon storage areas. How long until we can deploy? 6 hours to fully wake everyone and check all. Equipment, reported Hana. 12 hours to brief your people on our tactics and integrate our weapons with their ships. Taman turned to Commander Thex. Can your fleets hold the line for 12 hours? Thex thought about the evacuation fleets packed with refugees and protected by warships that could war that the awakened humans moved with a speed that amazed Commander Thex. Within hours of emerging from their sleep chambers, they had transformed the quiet station into a busy military headquarters. Soldiers checked weapons, engineers studied enemy data, and officers planned battle strategies. Commander Taman stood in the main command center, studying holographic displays that showed Void Hunter movements across the galaxy. His eyes were sharp and focused as he watched the patterns of destruction. Around him, his officers worked with the efficiency of people who had trained together for years. They are following the same routes as before, he said to Captain Sora. The hunger never learns new tricks. It just uses the old ones more effectively. Sora nodded as she analyzed the tactical data. The scouts are moving in 3 main groups. One is heading for the Nexus Prime system where your council meets. Another is advancing on the industrial worlds of the Forge sector. The third group is targeting the population centers in the Terra Nova region. Classic feeding pattern, observed Lieutenant Wu Jin. They want government centers, manufacturing capability, and large populations. Maximum energy absorption with minimum effort. Engineer Hana looked up from her computer workstation. Commander, I have good news and bad news. Our weapon systems are fully operational and have been improved by the AI research programs. But the Void Hunters are stronger than our historical data predicted. They have been feeding for months and growing more powerful. Taman studied the energy readings from the latest Void Hunter attacks. How much stronger? Individual scout ships are now equivalent to what we used to classify as light cruiser entities. Their main fleet elements are reading at battleship-class power levels. This was troubling news. During the original Shadow War, human forces had developed specific tactics for fighting different classes of hunger entities. If the enemy had grown stronger, those tactics might not work anymore. Captain Sora stepped forward. We adapt. We always adapt. Show me the weapon upgrades. Hana activated a holographic display showing new designs that had been developed during the humans' long sleep. Phase disruptors are now 30% more powerful and can track targets through multiple dimensional shifts. Light spears can be configured for either concentrated beams or area dispersal patterns. The void anchors can now be deployed in network formations to trap entire squadrons. What about the new weapons? Asked Taman. Solar mines that can be remotely detonated to create artificial stars. Dimensional barriers that can block Void Hunter movement through subspace. And something special. We call them reality locks. Wu Jin raised an eyebrow. Reality locks? Devices that force a small area of space to follow normal physical laws. Inside a reality lock field, the Void Hunters cannot phase through matter or absorb energy. They become solid and vulnerable to conventional weapons. Taemin smiled for the first time since awakening. Now that is useful. How many can we deploy? We have enough components for 12 major reality lock generators and about 50 smaller ones. The large ones can affect an area the size of a small moon. The small ones can trap individual ships. Commander Thex had been listening to the human planning session with growing amazement. These people talked about fighting impossible enemies as if it were routine work. How can you be so calm, he asked. You have been asleep for 200 years. The enemy is stronger than before. Your numbers are small. Taemin looked at him with patient eyes. Because we have done this before. The hunger is powerful, but it is not invincible. It has weaknesses and we know what they are. Fear is useful only if it helps you prepare. Once the battle begins, fear just gets you killed. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. The Void Hunter advance groups had begun their final approach to the core worlds. Evacuation fleets packed with refugees were fleeing toward the inner systems, but some of them were not fast enough. 3 transport ships carrying civilian families had gone dark near the Centauri colonies. That is where we start, Taemin decided. Captain Sora, select a strike team. We will demonstrate human tactics to our council friends. Sora chose 20 soldiers and began loading them into modified council ships that had been equipped with human weapons. The reality lock generators were too large for small vessels, but the phase disruptors and light spears could be mounted on scout ships and cruisers. Lieutenant Wu Jin took command of the strike force while Taemin remained at the station to coordinate with the council fleets. The mixed human-alien task force jumped into hyperspace and headed for the Centauri system at maximum speed. They arrived to find exactly what they expected. 4 Void Hunter scouts were circling the debris of the destroyed transport ships, feeding on the residual energy from the wreckage. The dark creatures looked like moving shadows against the stars, their forms shifting and flowing without solid edges. Council ships, maintain distance and observe. Wu Jin ordered through the communication system. Human units, begin attack pattern Alpha. The human pilots flew their ships in a formation that seemed random to the watching council officers. But there was method in their movement. They spread out to surround the Void Hunters, then began firing their phase disruptors in carefully timed sequences. The first shots seemed to have no effect. The energy beams passed through the shadow creatures without causing damage, but Wu Jin was not trying to hurt them yet. He was mapping their dimensional signatures. Targets acquired, he announced, switching to pattern Beta. Now the human ships began firing their light spears. These weapons channeled concentrated solar energy into focused beams that burned with the intensity of a star's core. When the beams struck the Void Hunters, the creatures reacted with obvious pain. Their shadowy forms writhed and contracted, trying to avoid the burning light. They are vulnerable to certain energy frequencies, Wu Jin explained over the radio. Solar energy at specific wavelengths can disrupt their molecular cohesion, but they adapt quickly, so we have to keep changing our approach. The Void Hunters began to fight back, sending tendrils of darkness toward the human ships. When the shadows touched a vessel, its lights began to dim and its engines started to fail, but the human pilots were ready for this. They fired their engines in short bursts, never staying in one place long enough for the energy drain to take hold. Pattern Gamma, Wu Jin ordered. Deploy void anchors. Small devices shot out from the human ships and surrounded the Void Hunters in a geometric pattern. When they activated, the space around the shadow creatures began to shimmer and change. Suddenly, the Void Hunters could not move through solid matter anymore. They were trapped in normal space, subject to normal physical laws. Now, said Wu Jin quietly. The combined human and council ships opened fire with every weapon they had. Energy beams, projectile weapons, and explosive missiles all struck the trapped Void Hunters simultaneously. Unable to phase away or absorb the incoming energy, the shadow creatures began to break apart. The first Void Hunter dissolved into wisps of dark smoke that scattered among the stars. The second tried to escape but ran into the anchor field and was destroyed by concentrated fire. The third and fourth lasted only seconds longer before they too were torn apart by the coordinated attack. In less than 10 minutes, 4 Void Hunters that had seemed invincible were gone. The council ship captains could barely believe what they had witnessed. These creatures had destroyed entire fleets, but the humans had eliminated them with what looked like routine tactics. How? Asked Captain Yerrick of the Vrex cruiser defender. How did you know their weaknesses? We learned during the First War, Wu Jin replied. Every type of hunger entity has specific vulnerabilities. The scouts are vulnerable to solar energy and can be trapped in dimensional anchor fields. The larger ones require different tactics. Back at the station, Engineer Hana was monitoring the battle through long-range sensors. She had been using the engagement to test new detection methods and gather data about current Void Hunter capabilities. "Commander," she reported to Taimin, "the enemy has been studying us too. These scouts adapted to our attacks faster than the historical data suggested they would. They are learning from each encounter." This was concerning news. If the Void Hunters could adapt quickly to human tactics, the war would become much more difficult. "How fast are they learning?" Taimin asked. "Hard to say for certain, but I estimate that tactics effective today might be only half as effective in a week." Captain Sora looked up from her planning station. "Then we need to hit them hard and fast before they can adapt fully." "What is the status of the main council fleets?" Commander Thex activated a holographic display showing friendly forces throughout the galaxy. "We have approximately 800 ships of various classes scattered across 12 systems. Most are protecting evacuation routes and refugee convoys." "Not enough," Taimin said bluntly. "We need to concentrate our forces and go on the offensive. Defensive tactics will not work against the hunger. They grow stronger the longer they are allowed to feed." "But the civilians," protested Thex. "If we pull our ships away from the evacuation routes, millions of people will be left unprotected. If we do not stop the scouts from calling their master, billions will die." Taimin replied. "Sometimes a commander must choose between bad options and terrible options." Lieutenant Wu Jin's voice came through the communi. The next 7 days passed in a blur of desperate activity. Across the galaxy, sleeping humans awakened from their centuries-long hibernation to find their worst nightmares had returned. Ancient weapons were powered up and loaded onto ships. Battle plans that had been refined during 200 years of AI analysis were distributed to mixed human and council crews. Commander Taimin had moved his headquarters to the council flagship Starbound, a massive vessel that now bristled with human weapons alongside its original armaments. The ship's main conference room had become a war room where humans and aliens worked together to track down the Void Hunter beacon. Engineer Hana stood before a holographic galaxy map, pointing to areas marked in red. "We have narrowed the possible locations to 3 star systems. The beacon requires enormous amounts of energy to operate, so it must be near major power sources. The Helios system has twin suns," observed Captain Sora. "Perfect for powering a dimensional transmitter. The Nexus Core region has the largest concentration of inhabited worlds," added Lieutenant Wu Jin. "Lots of life energy for them to tap into. And the Dark Nebula sector has gravitational anomalies that could mask the beacon's energy signature." Finished Commander Thex Taimin studied the 3 locations. Each one would require a major fleet action to investigate properly. But splitting their forces would leave them vulnerable to Void Hunter counterattacks. "How many ships do we have ready for combat?" he asked. 847 council vessels, reported Thex. 230 human ships from the awakened sleeper fleets. About half are equipped with our new weapons. Over 1,000 ships sounded impressive, but Taimin knew it was not enough. Intelligence reports suggested that the Void Hunters had over 3,000 scout ships, plus their larger command vessels. And somewhere out there, the beacon was nearing completion. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Yuki from her station. "Priority message from the forward scouts near Helios." The main display changed to show a human pilot's face. His expression was grim. "Commander, we have found something. The Void Hunters have built a massive structure around one of the suns. It is absorbing stellar energy and converting it into dimensional signals." "That is it," breathed Hana. "The beacon." The scout transmitted detailed sensor readings. The structure was enormous, larger than most moons. It wrapped around the star like a dark shell, feeding on the sun's energy and transforming it into something else. Massive transmission arrays pointed toward the dark spaces between galaxies. "How long until it is operational?" Taimin asked. "Unknown, sir. But the energy readings are increasing rapidly. Maybe hours, not days." Taimin made the hardest decision of his military career. All ships set course for the Helios system. Maximum speed. "Sir," protested Representative Korvac over the communications system, "that will leave the core worlds undefended." "What if this is a trap?" "If that beacon activates, the core worlds will not matter," Taimin replied. "Nothing will matter. We end this now, or we all die." The combined fleet jumped into hyperspace and raced toward their destiny. As they traveled, Human engineers worked frantically to install the last of their special weapons on Council ships. Reality lock generators were mounted on the largest vessels, solar mines were loaded into torpedo tubes, phase disruptors were calibrated to work with alien targeting systems. Captain Sora gathered the fleet commanders for a final briefing. The holographic display showed the Helios system with the beacon structure clearly visible around the primary star. "The enemy knows we are coming," she said. "Long-range sensors detect massive void hunter formations protecting the beacon. This will not be like our previous engagements. They will throw everything they have at us. How do we fight something that big?" asked Captain Yerrick of the Vrex. Lieutenant Wu Jin answered. "We do not fight the beacon directly. We attack its power source. If we can disrupt the energy flow from the star, the beacon will shut down. But how do we get close enough?" wondered Counselor Ithara. "Their fleet will intercept us long before we reach the star. We divide their attention," explained Taemin. "The main fleet will engage their forces directly. A small strike team will use the battle as cover to reach the beacon." Engineer Hana activated another display showing detailed technical specifications. "I have been analyzing the beacon's structure. There is a weak point where the energy conduits connect to the stellar collectors. A properly placed reality lock generator could destabilize the entire system." "How close would the strike team need to get?" asked Sora. "Very close, within a few kilometers of the stellar surface. The heat and radiation will be extreme." Commander Thex stepped forward. "My ship has the best shields in the fleet. I will lead the strike team." "No," said Taemin firmly. "This is a human responsibility. We created this situation when we went to sleep instead of finishing the job 200 years ago." The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Helios system. What they saw there made even the veteran human warriors feel afraid. The beacon structure covered nearly half the star, pulsing with dark energy that made space itself seem sick. Around it, thousands of void hunter ships moved in perfect formation. But these were not the simple scout vessels they had fought before. Many of the enemy ships were massive constructs that seemed to bend light around them. Others appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. All of them radiated power that made the space around them shimmer with dangerous energy. "All ships prepare for battle," ordered Taemin. "Remember what, we are not just fighting for our own lives. We are fighting for every living thing in this galaxy." The battle began when the void hunters detected the approaching fleet. Dark energy beams lanced out across space, targeting the largest human and council ships. But this time, the defenders were ready. Reality lock generators activated in sequence, creating bubbles of normal space-time that trapped clusters of enemy vessels. Inside these fields, the void hunters became solid and vulnerable. Concentrated fire from dozens of ships tore them apart before they could adapt. Solar mines detonated among the enemy formations, creating miniature stars that burned with cleansing light. Void hunters caught in the explosions dissolved like shadows at dawn. Phase disruptors fired in coordinated patterns, disrupting the enemy's ability to exist in multiple dimensions at once. But the void hunters fought back with terrible fury. Massive command ships released clouds of smaller entities that swarmed around the allied vessels like angry insects. Dark tendrils reached out to drain power from any ship that came too close. Several council cruisers went dark and began drifting helplessly through space. Captain Sora commanded the main battle line while Taemin led a small strike force toward the beacon. His team consisted of 12 ships, including the fastest human interceptors and the most heavily shielded council vessels. They plunged through the enemy formations, taking heavy fire but pressing forward. Wu Jin's ship was hit by a dark energy beam and began losing power. Hana's vessel suffered hull breaches that forced her crew to seal off entire sections. But they kept moving toward their target. As they approached the star, the heat became intense. Ship hulls glowed red-hot despite their shields. Cooling systems worked at maximum capacity to keep the crews alive. Through the viewports, they could see the beacon structure more clearly, a dark web of energy conduits that covered the stellar surface like a parasitic infection. "There," pointed Hana through the communications link, "the primary junction point. If we can place a reality lock generator there, it will cascade through the entire network." The junction was protected by massive void hunter guardians, entities the size of battleships that seemed to be made of pure darkness. They moved to intercept the strike team, launching attacks that turned space itself into a weapon. Taemin made his final gambit. "All ships except mine fall back and provide covering fire. I am going in alone." "Sir, that is suicide," protested Wu Jin. "Maybe, But if I fail, you can try again. If we all go together and fail, there will be no second chance. Taemin's ship was the smallest and fastest in the strike force. It had been specially modified with the most powerful reality lock generator they could build. As he dove toward the beacon junction, enemy fire filled the space around him. His shields failed, then his armor began to melt from the stellar heat. But he reached the target. The reality lock generator deployed at point-blank range, creating a field of normal physics right at the heart of the beacon's power system. Suddenly, the dark energy conduits became solid matter subject to normal physical laws. The stellar heat that they had been channeling and controlling became raw destructive force. The beacon structure began to collapse in on itself. Explosions raced along the energy conduits as the system overloaded. The dark shell around the star cracked and began to fall apart, but Taemin's ship was too close to the destruction. The reality lock field had trapped him as well, preventing his escape. As the beacon collapsed, his vessel was pulled into the star's surface. His last transmission reached the fleet clearly. Tell them we kept our promise. Tell them the darkness will not return. The beacon's destruction sent shockwaves through the entire Void Hunter fleet. Without the beacon to coordinate them, the enemy ships began to location Sci.